So today we're going to be talking about how to analyze a job description and break it down so that you have all the elements that you need for resume, cover letter, interview development, and of course, assessing whether the job is worth your time in the first place. We're going to go through a specific example, and once at the end, we can jump into questions. So let's jump in. So there are four main elements of a job description most of the time. There are some job descriptions that don't adhere to this structure because folks getting creative or folks not writing job descriptions particularly well. But in general, a job description is going to have these four main elements. You're at the top, you're going to have some sort of about the company, about the role, situation where they are giving you some background and some big picture information about the company, the role, and how the role fits into the company. There's going to be a responsibilities section that's going to talk about the different things that you have to do. There's going to be a requirements or qualifications section that we are all very familiar and driven to anxiety by. And then at the bottom, usually that there's some sort of compliance information or disclosures. The compliance is usually pieces, whatever their lawyers told them that they have to include. And when I say disclosures, those are sort of the optional things that they might include to attract candidates or repel candidates, depending on what they're trying to accomplish. But that's where we would find things like benefits information, compensation information, location information, that sort of stuff. That would be in the compliance and disclosure section. And so these four main elements are present in most job descriptions. They aren't always in this order. They aren't always present. Sometimes people get creative, as I mentioned, but generally these are the places where we want to look to figure out whether a position is worth our time or not. And so in today's conversation, we are going to talk about how to look at these four elements to identify the things that you need in order to put together really great materials and prep for your interviews. And so basically, here's what you are looking out for. You want to really identify the key responsibilities. What are you going to be working on? What kinds of skills and tasks are you going to be leveraging on a day-to-day basis? Or can you get a picture of what a day in the life is going to be like, and that's going to help you figure out whether the job is something that's in line with what you would like to be doing. Then, of course, we really want to make sure that we are identifying key outcomes. People are really good at paying attention to the responsibilities, but these next two can be a little bit up in the air, depending. And so we really want to identify key outcomes. This is incredibly important and advantageous for you to really hone in on in putting together your materials, and in particular in your interview questions. And this is particularly important for folks who are transitioning in some way, pivoting in some way. Being able to hone in on these key outcomes is super important. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that in our example. And then, of course, another really important thing that we often aren't as active about identifying is our flags. What are our red flags, big cons that we are not excited about? And they might be a red flag that is big enough or important enough to us that we don't even consider the position further. Or it might be that there are a handful and we're kind of concerned, but there are some other things that are working well. And so we might move forward tentatively. And then there are orange flags where we are not sure exactly what they mean by that, but it seems like it might not be good. And then, of course, there are green flags where a company is signaling in the way that they describe themselves or describe the role that it could be a really good fit for you. And so all three of these are things that we want to be looking for in the job description in the various four elements. And that is going to help you identify whether you should apply and help you strategize around your application materials. Very, very, very important. When you are just browsing job descriptions, scanning through, there's nothing wrong with doing this in your head. But once a job description goes from, that's interesting, to, I think I might apply to that, you really do not want to do this in your head. You want to copy that job description into a Google Doc or a Pages doc or a Word doc, wherever it is that you doc. Put it in a separate doc so that you can start breaking it down and start pulling out those elements that we're looking for, so that if you do decide that you're going to move forward, that analysis is something that you can draw from really easily. If you're doing the analysis in your head, once it's time for you to work on your resume and your cover letter, once it's time for you to do your interview, you're going to have to do all of that analysis all over again. And we really want to set you up to where you only have to do it once and then review it a couple of times and maybe supplement it with additional information if you're able to, get inside info from your network or as you move through the interview process. And so I really, really recommend do not do this in your head, do it on paper. Just copy the whole job description over into a doc, and then we can break it down in the way that I'm going to show you in your example. Another really good reason why this is important is sometimes job descriptions disappear. If they decide that if they post it on LinkedIn, posting on LinkedIn costs money. If they post it on Indeed, posting on Indeed costs money. And so if the contract for that particular listing is up, that listing can disappear. And so if the only reference you have is that link, you might have a hard time tracking that job description down again in the future. So can't say enough. Don't do this in your head. Do it on paper. There are infinite benefits. And then, of course, one last benefit is that once you've done it on paper, regardless of whether you decide to move forward with the role, you can take some of those elements and incorporate them into lots of other aspects of your job search or your professional brand so that it can be beneficial for you. Okay, let's go through an example. I'm going to go back and time travel into my previous job history, my corporate career, because that is where I can be really granular about identifying the kinds of things that would be important to me if I was going to be applying for a position. As you look for roles in your space or where you're trying to transition to, you're going to have enough understanding of your own preferences to be able to do a similar level of analysis. So this is a marketing director position at an ad tech company. And I'm going to pretend that I would like to transition into a role like this. And so this is the summary for this job description. Also, this is an actual job description. I didn't edit it or anything about it at all. And so there are some typos and there are some things that don't make a whole lot of sense. And this is the summary. And so responsibilities, we're looking for responsibilities, we're looking for outcomes, and we're looking for flags. And so in this situation, responsibilities are in our goldenrod color, and then our outcomes are in our evergreen color. And so if I was going to pull this out into a doc, then I could take this paragraph and say, okay, I need to make sure that my golden things are in my resume somewhere. And if I can come up with a story for my green thing, that's going to be a good thing for me to put into my cover letter. Now, let's go ahead and move forward into the responsibilities section. I'm assuming that none of you are applying for marketing director positions at ad tech companies, and so I'm not going to read all the way through this, but hopefully while I've been chatting, you've been able to compare the gold things with the green things to really tell the difference. The responsibilities are things that you are doing, things that you are responsible for, projects, but the outcomes are the result of your work. The thing that the company decided to create the job for, the thing that is going to be on the performance review. And so let's move on to the responsibilities. And so here, since all of the responsibilities are responsibilities, usually I haven't outlined those in gold and just pulled out the outcomes. And you can see that there are a lot of outcomes hiding in these responsibilities. And these are all things that you could use to create where, you might want to, if you have driven similar results in the past, you would want to highlight those in your resume. You might want to tell a story about them in your cover letter. And you certainly would want to, if you were called back for an interview, have something in the back of your mind that you could pull out to speak to each one of these things, because these are the outcomes that the role is responsible for. And so a lot of times we get caught up in the requirements, or we get caught up in the responsibilities. But the reason why the company decides to open a headcount and hire for a particular role is because they want a certain outcome. And they think that certain responsibilities are going to drive that outcome. And they think certain requirements are going to lead to the kind of person who can execute the responsibilities. But the thing they care about is the outcome. And so when you're going through the responsibilities section, certainly we want to evaluate it for all of the things that we care about, but we want to really hone in on what those outcomes are, because those are going to be really important building blocks for your application process and your interview process. Now let's get down to the requirements / qualifications spot. And so this one I've focused more on flags. And so this is more, again, me thinking about myself. And so these flags are not necessarily flags for everyone. They would be flags for me if I was actually considering this position back when I was in my corporate career. And so there are a bunch of red flags here, which surprise would lead to me not applying for this role. But I want to talk through them a little bit just in case something similar, a similar thought process could be helpful for you. So the biggest one is actually down toward the bottom, is that they are requiring that the person is bilingual English and Spanish, which I am not. And so I would immediately be disqualified for this question and for this job description. And usually with requirements and qualifications, I say ignore them and just focus on the execution. But that would be one where there is an exception. If you are going to be engaging regularly with someone who doesn't speak the same language as you do, you're not going to be able to do the job well, even if you can do it well in your own language. Another one that would be a deal breaker for me is that they're not allowing any relocation, and your girl ain't moving back to Florida. So that would be a red flag for me, and that would keep me from applying for this position. But another thing that would concern me about my ability to be effective in advocating for my candidacy are some of these other red things that are farther up, that they want someone who they are saying all caps must have experience in the technology industry. They're not interested in pivoters. And so I would be a pivoter if I was going to apply to this position, because my marketing experience is in the journalism industry, not in the technology industry. There's certainly overlaps, but they want someone who has dedicated B2B marketing experience, preferably in enterprise software and hardware. And that is not the kind of marketing experience that I have. So those are red flags. Now, this orange flag is orange for kind of an interesting reason. This is a job description that has a lot of typos in it. And it is concerning to me when job descriptions are messy or lazy. To me, that is an orange flag. Does that mean that your overall process and bureaucracy and company is messy and lazy? Or is it just that the workflow for putting together a job description is not that good? Or that the specific hiring manager who's hiring for this position could be a great leader, could be really functionally expertise, but not have a lot of experience with hiring, and therefore wrote a bad job description. And so that's a orange flag for me, where I would want to think of what are some questions that I can ask to better understand whether this is a blip or whether this is part of a pattern. And then some green flags, there's some alignment in terms of my actual experience and the things that I like doing. And again, me thinking about myself in my corporate career, I do have 5+ years, 10+ years of direct management experience. I do really love analyzing things, and the majority of my professional experience has been driving marketing accountability, and it's something that I enjoy doing. And I love communicating both in written format and a verbal format. And so those are green flags for me, that if that is really important to them and they're putting it here in the requirements, then the likelihood of me leveraging those skills regularly in the role is pretty high. So that's a green flag. And so this is just an example of the kind of detail that you kind of want to go into before you apply for a position. A lot of times, we can want to move as quickly as possible because applying for jobs is time consuming and boring and tedious. But this is one of those things where it is worth it for you to really take your time, because it saves you time and saves you effort and energy and frustration in the future. If you really take time to break down the job description, it's going to be a lot easier for you to weed out opportunities that are not right for you, and then pitch yourself really well for the opportunities that are right for you. And so let's talk about what to do with what you have found. And so first, with the key responsibilities and key outcomes, again, you want to identify examples and stories that you can incorporate into your application materials and into your interviews. And then with your flags, you want to pull those flags out. You might want to pull them separately, maybe down at the last page or something of your doc with your job description, and write a corresponding question for each of your flags that helps you get higher quality information about the things that you're concerned about. And so in this example, let's say for my orange flag is like, is this poorly written job description a reflection of the overall company, or a reflection of just its hiring process, or is it a reflection of the individual responsible for this job description? And so that would be something where I might ask a question about how people collaborate, or how they build infrastructure and workflows so that things can work more efficiently and be accurate. Those sorts of questions I might ask to see whether this was a blip or a pattern. And then the last thing that I want to say before I close out our lesson and head over to questions is that don't forget about your worksheet. And so we had a session a couple months ago that was specifically about how to decide whether you should apply based on your qualifications. And so don't forget that you have access to this worksheet. I'm going to drop the link in the chat, and it will be down in the show notes as well. And if you want to review that lesson again, don't forget that it is in the vault. And so if you go into the locker in your course area, the July 27th lesson goes through how to use your worksheet to figure out whether you are qualified enough, which is a bit of a separate question from what we covered today. But between those two things, if you break down the job description and find that it's a good fit for you, if you pull the job description into your worksheet and feel confident about your qualifications, you are going to have all of the elements that you need to put together a solid application that has a high likelihood of callback. And so with that said, I am looking forward to hearing your questions.